this week has seen over 50 Nigerians killed while siphoning fuel from a crashed tanker in the central Benue state. And at the ongoing African Cup of Nations in Egypt, 16 teams qualify for the knockout stages while 8 others crash out. This is Africa Focus. Here are some of the stories we've got lined up for you.
Elephant overpopulation. We are in South Africa where rangers are facing a unique challenge. While in Kenya, a conservancy goes high-tech as it combats poaching. And finally, we find out why kids play could help alleviate Ghana's crippling electricity crisis.
I'm Lenny Rashid, and our sign language interpreter is Michael Maidia. Before we get into the main stories, let's look at the news that made the headlines this past week.
Leaders of the member states of the Economic Community of West African States, known as ECOWAS, formally agreed on Saturday to name a planned common currency, the ECO. The 15-member group announced at the end of a summit in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, that ECO was adopted as the name of ECOWAS single currency. The idea of a common currency for the West African region was first mooted almost 30 years ago in the hope of boosting cross-border trade and economic development. They aim to have the currency in place next year, and leaders in Abuja reaffirmed the gradual approach to the single currency, starting with countries that meet the convergent criteria, a statement said. Economists say that they understand the thinking behind the currency plan. However, they believe it is unrealistic and could even be dangerous for the region's economies, which are dominated by Nigeria, which accounts for 2/3 of the region's economic output. During the meeting, President Muhammadu Buhari handed over chairmanship of the organization to the President of the Niger Republic, Muhammadu Issoufou.
Doctors in Sudan say at least 5 protesters have been killed as tens of thousands poured on the streets across the country to pressure the country's ruling generals to hand over power to a civilian-led administration. They are also seeking justice for the scores of victims of a deadly military crackdown. Dubbed the Millions March, Sunday's mass demonstrations were the first since security forces on June 3rd killed more than 100 people during the bloody dispersal of a protest camp outside the military headquarters, the focal point of the protesters' months-long struggle for democracy. The march came as the African Union AU and neighboring Ethiopia stepped up efforts to mediate the ongoing crisis between the protest organizers and the military, which seized power in April when it overthrew long-time President Omar al-Bashir in the wake of mass protests against his autocrat rule. Military Chief General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo on Saturday warned he would not tolerate any quote-unquote vandalism at the protests.
Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, winner of the presidential election in Mauritania, hailed the beginning of democratic pluralism in the conservative Saharan country, while the Constitutional Council announced that definitive election results will be released this week. Ghazouani, a former general, is a close ally of outgoing President Mohamed Ould Abdelaziz, who stepped down after serving the maximum 2 5-year terms. The election represented Mauritania's first democratic transition of power since independence from France in 1960. However, opposition leaders have accused the authorities of fixing the presidential poll and say hundreds of people were arrested in a crackdown on protests that followed the June 22nd vote. Ghazouani, who has already received congratulations from countries including former colonial power France, as well as Saudi Arabia, Morocco and Algeria, thanked his campaign team and supporters. According to official results, ruling party candidate Ghazouani won the country's election with 52% of the vote, averting the need for a second-round runoff election.
Protesters thronged the heart of Algiers' capital on Friday despite a heavy police presence, vowing to push their demands for transition after the ouster of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Under a scorching sun, massive crowds marched through the streets of Algiers all afternoon in the 19th consecutive week of mass protests against the North African country's regime. Some 100 police vans, many more than normal, were deployed in Algiers from early morning, along with water cannon and bulldozers. Mass protests sparked by ailing President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's intention to stand for a fifth term led to his resignation on April 2nd. But the demonstrations have carried on, with demonstrators demanding the departure of regime insiders and the establishment of independent institutions.
Africa's elephant population plummeted from roughly 1 million in 1970 to around 400,000 today. This decline is largely blamed on poachers seeking tusks. However, due to intense conservation efforts and increased human population on the continent, human-wildlife conflict remains common. Culling remains a last resort for managing elephants in South Africa, and there have been recent calls to resume culling operations in Botswana.
In many parts of Africa, poachers are decimating elephant populations, but here in South Africa, rangers are facing a different challenge: overpopulation. Elephant numbers are doubling every 15 years, and with each animal eating 200 kilos of vegetation every day, it's putting pressure on the environment. So they're taking drastic measures, firing contraceptives into female elephants from the air. A task that's easier said than done.
Everyone thinks, well, an elephant's a really big animal. Yes, it is really big. When you're moving a helicopter and they're running underneath the trees and the helicopter's trying to miss the trees and everything like that, it does get a little bit tricky. You also want to make sure that you always hit the elephant in a good muscle, because for the vaccine to be most effective, it's got to get absorbed through the blood vessels in the muscles.
Researchers at Makalali Game Reserve in the north of the country are studying the long-term effects of contraception on elephant herds. They've equipped some female with satellite tracking collars, but they have to be changed regularly, which involves anesthetizing the animals.
The collar's been on for 4 years and it's expired. So we're putting a new satellite collar on, which will enable us to monitor the animal and just track to a better degree, because her movements represent that of the herd. So it's important for the monitoring, specifically from the behavioral side effects, and to make sure that everything's going according to plan.
Audrey's research so far shows that birth control has not affected social dynamics between animals within herds.
In essence, the elephants' home ranges have remained unchanged. Their associations have remained intact and as strong as ever. And so everything is going according to plan.
Thanks to the contraception program, numbers have stabilized in Makalali Game Reserve at least. It has now been adopted in more than 20 reserves, allowing rangers across the country to control elephant numbers without having to resort to a cull.
Located in Laikipia County is the Pejeta Conservancy, one of East Africa's largest black rhino sanctuary. The Conservancy is situated at the foothills of the Aberdare Ranges and the magnificent snow-capped Mount Kenya, home to the only 2 northern white rhinos left on Earth. The sanctuary has now gone high-tech in a bid to protect wildlife and combat poaching in the sanctuary.
According to Save the Rhino, more than 7,200 African rhinos have been lost to poaching during the last decade. Poaching, even in some protected areas like the Pejeta Conservancy, poses a huge threat to the rhino population. It is with this in mind that the Conservancy research team have introduced new technology that they hope will address the issue. The anti-poaching technology device has a camera that scans around the clock for intrusions, relaying real-time images to armed guards at the 360 square kilometer park. Damian Otieno, an IT engineer in charge of the Conservancy, is one of the brains behind this project.
Able to make sure that we protect our wildlife, we want to see the numbers increasing for, biodiversity, making sure that it is very diverse and having all these species all under one roof.
The researchers are working on a chip that is small enough that it will fit in a rhino's horn. It is also capable of live transmission that locates the animal's exact location and core vitals. Otieno says this new technology will help curb poaching and increase the biodiversity of all species, as they will be located in the same area. The rhino horn is highly valued in parts of Asia for its believed medicinal qualities and still fetches higher prices than gold.
If a poacher comes in through the corridors today or even now, this camera will actually capture them, and it will tell us that this is actually a person. It will tell me how many, or it will tell us how many people there are, what is it that they're carrying. It can actually be in a position to tell and see in the image. And we actually send our teams, our security teams, to go and actually arrest them before they even do any poaching.
Other innovations have been tested elsewhere in Africa to combat wildlife crime, but cost remains a major hurdle to their widespread uptake. However, all Pejeta's researchers are developing solutions that can be replicated cost-effectively.
You know, we are very much in our infancy when it comes to this kind of stuff. It is pretty sort of cutting edge from a conservation perspective, albeit other people have done it in other parts of Africa, often at great expense. So I think the trick will be is finding solutions that can then be replicated cost effectively.
All Pejeta hopes to adapt this to rhino tracking, providing intelligence about where and when to deploy rangers and to stay one step ahead of the poachers. The Conservancy was home to Sudan. The last male northern white rhino died in 2018 due to age-related causes at the age of 45. In the 1970s, 20,000 black rhinos roamed freely in the country. Today, as a result of extensive poaching, there are only about 700 left.
Ghana's power sector has over the past decade been plagued with power supply challenges, resulting in considerable impact on the economic situation in the country. The World Bank ranked electricity as the second most important constraint to business activities in the country. Empower Playgrounds, though, has come up with a unique idea of alleviating the situation.
Producing electricity can be as simple as child's play. At this school on Ghana's Volta River, children's efforts in the playground are turned into energy. The play equipment has turbines that powers a battery in the classroom. The battery recharges lamps that children then take home, giving them light to do their homework by.
As you have seen the children turning round on the merry-go-round, there is a battery inside the room which charges the system over there, so that when the children after school, they send the lighting back home, and then after the lighting is going off, they come for recharge. So it is helping the students to learn.
George Thompson, a project manager for the charity Empower Playgrounds, travels to the most remote parts of the country to equip schools with these adapted playground rides. 42 schools across the country are already taking part in the scheme. A separate project sees locals pay around $150 for a battery that's recharged by solar energy, allowing them to have light in their homes and plug in electrical equipment.
Our objective is not to make any money from or profit from this, but we need to get the center sustainable, or the project sustainable. So we ask them to pay 500 Ghana cedis to be hooked up to the system, and then each time they bring the battery for recharge, they pay 5 cedis for that.
Electricity is a state-run utility in Ghana, but power cuts are frequent and can last up to 24 hours. The disruption to businesses saw Ghanaians take to the street last month in protest.
Apart from the industry, there is no social life. There is no nightlife in Ghana, because we go under the period of 12 hours light and then 24 hours without lights. So you can see the effect on the very small manufacturers, small retailers.
Both schemes have reduced the number of locals on the island of Pejeta from using expensive and polluting fuel and generators. Now they have a more environmentally friendly option, and for the children, a good excuse to play.
Coming up after the break.
We are in the DRC, where a daily commute in Kinshasa may have the best claim of the world's worst commuter nightmare.
We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial. Keep it switched. Welcome back to Africa Focus. Internet users in Sudan have defied all odds to stay connected to the world, despite the military's authority blockade of internet access for 2 weeks. Access to the internet, and especially to 4G mobile phones, has been largely blocked since the bloodshed on the 3rd of June that occurred as a result of a sit-in of demonstrators outside army headquarters demanding a transfer of power to civilians.
In a lush garden cave in Sudan's capital, seeking ways to bypass an internet blackout imposed by army rulers. Here, an hour of internet costs 50 Sudanese pounds, which is approximately $1. Generally, across Sudan, the internet is now accessible only through land telephone lines or fiber optic cables, and the connection is erratic.
If we are out of our homes where we cannot find Wi-Fi, then we cannot call anyone or we cannot convey the messages back to our home. Like I'm from India, I used to do all the calls on WhatsApp only. So till now I'm unable to make WhatsApp calls. The Wi-Fi is also very slow.
Internet on mobile phones and fixed land connections has been widely cut across Sudan since the violent dispersal of a protest camp outside army headquarters on June 3rd that left dozens dead and hundreds wounded. The ruling military council imposed a blackout to prevent further mobilization of protesters, according to users.
We used to do nowadays, if we are issuing a ticket, some clients are there who cannot come to us. So for that we used to send our messenger who take the hard copy of the ticket and give them. So yeah, the workload has been increased.
Initial protest was sparked by a tripling of bread prices in December and led to the downfall of longtime President Omar al-Bashir on April 11. Even routine activities like checking social media or booking a taxi through an online app has now become nearly impossible.
In Sokoto, an old city in the northern Nigeria, Usmane Danfodio's tomb attracts pilgrims from all over West Africa. For many Muslims, this scholarly and reformist Fulani is considered a saint. In 1808, he established the Caliphate of Sokoto, an Islamic state that extended from Burkina Faso to Cameroon.
Pilgrims pray in silence in front of Usman Danfodio's tomb every day. Usman Danfodio was a 19th century Fulani and Muslim ruler. He led a jihad against traditional and tyrannical chiefdoms in northern Nigeria to establish the Sokoto Caliphate.
I have come to visit Usman Danfodio for the fulfillment of all my wishes, and I hope they will be granted by the grace of God.
He is considered a saint in West Africa. His followers are mostly Fulani breeders who praise his fight against social injustices and seek his support.
I just got married, but before moving in with my husband, I wanted to pray for Usman Danfodio's blessing and ask him to help all women who are looking for a husband.
Danfodio's Islamic State flourished for several decades until the first British settlers arrived in the 20th century. But his legacy is not universally accepted in modern Nigeria. Critics fear that his story acts as a pretext for Muslims seeking to Islamize the country, a fear crystallized by the cycles of violence between Muslim Fulani herders and Christian farmers in central Nigeria, which have killed thousands of people in recent years.
These attacks that are well coordinated seem to have been planned. But who must have been behind these attacks, we tend to wonder. Our suspicion grows as well to suspect even government itself.
The current president of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, is a Fulani Muslim from northern Nigeria. His slowness to condemn violence involving his people has reinforced the stigmatization of Fulani communities.
Boko Haram has been in existence since the late 1990s. Centered in Maiduguri, the capital of northeastern state of Borno, it has been blamed for countless atrocities in Yobe, Kano, Bauchi, Borno and Kaduna. But what does the group hope to achieve? The following video graphic 6 to explain this.
Since emerging in 2002, the Boko Haram Islamist insurgency in Nigeria and bordering areas has developed into one of the world's most brutal conflicts. At least 27,000 people have been killed and some 2 million displaced. Self-educated preacher Muhammad Yusuf founded the group in northeastern Borno state, calling Muslims to reject the state and regard Western science and modern literature as apostasy. The conflict is concentrated in the northeast. Nigeria's population is split evenly between Christians, mostly in the south, and Muslims in the north. After Yusuf's death during a 2009 uprising that killed some 700 people, fiery preacher Abubakar Sheko emerged as a more extreme leader. Fighters rampaged through towns and villages, seizing territory to create a new caliphate, slaughtering people as they did so. Initially known as the Nigerian Taliban, the group later acquired the name Boko Haram, Western education is a sin. In 2014, the group kidnapped 219 female students from their boarding school in Chibok. The fate of many of the girls is unknown. In 2015, Boko Haram declared allegiance to the Islamic State group. The same year, a multinational force of troops from Nigeria, Niger, Chad and Cameroon tried to defeat the group as it began increasing cross-border attacks. Goodluck Jonathan, president from 2010 to 2015 and from Nigeria's south, was accused by critics of doing little until his re-election was in doubt. His successor, Muhammadu Buhari, has cooperated more with neighbouring countries, but his claim in 2015 that Nigeria had won a technical victory proved premature. Boko Haram split into two main factions in 2016, one with Sheko in charge, the other headed by Mohammed Yusuf's son, Abu Musab al-Banawi. Both have pledged allegiance to the Islamic State group, but IS has backed Banawi. The circumstances that gave rise to Boko Haram persist in Nigeria: widespread corruption, poverty, underdevelopment, and the gap between north and south.
44-year-old Christian Yumbi is one of the top chefs on the African continent. Having studied at the prestigious Ritz Escoffier cooking school in Paris, he found it hard to find a job in Brussels. Refusing to give up, the food lover took out a €19,000 loan to open his first restaurant in Belgium, which he named Resource. In 2012, he returned home and founded his own restaurant in the country of his birth.
Top quality organic vegetables fresh from the farm, destined for this restaurant in Kinshasa. Resource was opened in 2012 by local star chef Christian Yumbi. Offering high-end Congolese cuisine with a modern twist, Yumbi is a one-off in a restaurant scene dominated by expats. But his journey wasn't a straightforward one. After graduating in administration from the Free University of Brussels, he ended up working in kitchens almost by chance.
At the time, it was hard to find work as a foreigner in Belgium. It was almost impossible. All my Belgian and white friends with whom I completed my studies found work, and I was struggling to find work. And that's why, as I had a bit of experience in the kitchen, I reorientated myself, because there was a real demand for kitchen staff.
Despite then gaining a master's degree from the prestigious Ritz Escoffier cookery school in Paris, none of his Belgian employers would appoint him head chef. So he took out a loan and opened his own restaurant in 2004. But hit hard by the financial crisis and lamenting what he saw as latent racism, he returned to Congo. After opening his restaurant in Kinshasa, he then went on to win Pan-African TV contest Star Chef, finally bringing his twist on Congolese cuisine to the top table. Yumbi has set up a training school, and every year the best student is hired to work in his restaurant. Getting here may have been a slow burn, but he says he feels more fulfilled and free in Congo than anywhere else.
On Africa Focus, we love hearing from you, so make sure you get interactive with us on our various social media pages. Remember, you can view this program along with our wide array of other programs on DSTV channel 268 and on Azam TV channel 138 and on Zuku channel 53. On behalf of the entire team here on Africa Focus, thank you for keeping us company on this exciting journey. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing. Keep it switched.